In this tutorial, we're going to look at various ways to go through events or clips on the timeline. How we go through the events will depend on what exactly we are needing to do with them, and so we are going to see what happens when we do the exact same thing, but we do them in different ways depending on how we go through the clips. So let's take a look and see what happens here. So let's look at the various methods we can use by beginning with the one that we first started with in the previous tutorial. I have already done all of these and commented them out, so we're just going to uncomment them and go through each one. So the first method here is using the enumerator that we used in the previous example. The first thing I'm going to do on every one of them is set the previous end to null. Then we're going to get the event, and if the previous end is not equal to null, then we're going to change the start to be the previous end plus the gap variable that I set up here. Notice I set it up to a time code, its gap, and we did timecode dot from seconds, and I put 1 in it. So theoretically, we should end up with a gap of 1 second between each event. But let's see what really happens depending on how things are done. So in this case, we're going through all the events using the get enumerator, and then we will move next to each one. We will get the current event, and then we will change the beginning of it, and then we will set the previous end to now be the end of the current event. So let's see what happens when we run this script. Here we have 26 events on the timeline, so let's take this and run this particular script, and you will see it didn't exactly do what we thought it would do. For the first few up here, we did get our 1 second gap between each one, but the problem is now we started moving clips over other clips, and as we got this far, we actually would skip over some clips because they actually changed order as we were going along. So now you notice we got a few more that gapped, and then we had a few more that they didn't change the order, and then we got some really big gaps back here. So this really didn't work the way we thought it was going to. So let's undo this, and we will look at the next method. This is the for each loop that we converted it to in the previous tutorial. The for each loop is probably the one that you're going to use most often, as it will simply go through all the events on the track in the order that they are on the track. And unless you're doing something that would change the order like this one is going to do, this is the one that you're probably going to use. So keep this in mind, that this is the one that you're going to go to most of the time, unless you need something different. So let's go ahead and save this, run it using this version, and you will see we got the exact same results as we did in the previous example. So let's undo this, and we'll go to the next method. Okay, in this method, we are still going through them forward through the list one by one through the events directly from the track, only we're going to access them like we're accessing them from an array. So we have to go through the number of events that there are on the track, and then we are going to get the ith event, which means we're simply going to go through them in order. Let's take a look at this again. And you will see that we got the exact same results as we got to the other two, because we're looking at the events directly on the timeline and we're going through them forward. So all three of those technically give us the exact same results. It's just that the for each is the easiest one to use in this case. So this one we're still going to be looking at the timeline, except this time we're going to start at the end and go down to the first one, and we're going to go backwards. Notice the I minus minus instead of the plus plus. So this time we're going to go through all the events on the timeline, but we're going to go through them backwards. Let's see what happens this time. Okay, this may not be what you expected, but it is exactly what should have happened. So it took the last event, then it put the next to the last event 1 second after it, then the event before that, 1 second after it, until we got them all listed here backwards. So it literally moved them to backwards on the timeline. So now let's look at the next method. In this method, we're going to do something different. Once again, we've got our previous n equals null. All of this is exactly the same, but the big change is right here on this line. We're going to create an array list, and we are going to create that array list from the events on that track. So our track events equals a new array list of track.events. Now on the next line, we're going to do our for each and do each event in that array. Notice we're looking at the array, not the events on the actual track. So let's see what happens when we do that. And we finally get the results that we kind of expected to begin with. And the reason it did it this way is because it was able to look at every event in order, because it was looking at the events in the array and not the events on the track. So therefore it did not get out of order when we skipped things on the track. So when we were looking at the ith event on the track, it was able to look at the correct one in the array, whereas it got out of sync when it was looking directly at the track because they were changing order on the track. This gives us the exact result we wanted. And for this particular task, when you're moving events to spread them out, or if you're deleting events off the timeline, this is going to be the method you want to use. So we put them in an array, and we just do a for each, and then we can move or delete or whatever we want to do. And now we do the next method. This one, we are also creating an array list, but this time we're going to go through them as an array using our for loop and going up to the count -1, and we should, if we've done things correctly, get the exact same results that we just got in the previous one. And you notice that it worked out so that it was exactly the same, because once again we looked through each event in forward order and we looked at them in order. And now we have one more option to look at. This one, we're going to look at each of the events in the array again, only this time we're going to go backwards through the array list. Theoretically, if things work the way we expect, we should get the same results that we got when we went through them backwards before. So let's find out. And we did. So it processed this one first, and then it moved the one ahead of it 1 second after it, and it moved the one ahead of that 1 second after that. So we ended up with our entire list in backwards order, separated by 1 second each, exactly as we would have expected. So let's go back and review these once again. Using the enumerator, I would never do it that way. There's really no reason to go through all this trouble to get to them. Using the for each, this is the one I would use probably 98% of the time, because we're just going to go through each event and look at them. And as long as I'm not moving them around so that one would get in front of the other accidentally and change my order, I'm okay using this one. So if I just want to look at, say, all selected events, I can do it this way. This will do the exact same thing as the for each, so there's really no need to do it this way. So I would definitely use this one before I use this one every time. The next one, processing it backwards. There are some times when I want to look at the events backwards, and you might say, why might that be? Well, for example, in my multicam tool in Excalibur, when I do the camera cuts, I get to the point where I've got so many camera cuts in the front that I don't want to wade through all those camera cuts in the front, and instead I want to look backwards so that I can process things much faster that way. So if I'm looking for a specific spot, then I will process it coming in from the back and get there a whole lot quicker than I would be processing all of the events if I came from the front. And then there's this method. Using the array, that will show me them in the exact order they were originally every time. That is very important if you're deleting or if you're moving, creating gaps. If you're making things shorter, you can go through them in forward order, just using the for each at the top. But anytime that you're spreading things apart or you're needing to remove things, this is the way to go. Once again, this one does the exact same thing as this one, so I would choose the for each over the array processing anytime. And then if you need to look at them in the original order backwards, this would be the way to go. Odds are you're not going to need to do that. So, like I said, probably 98% of the time you're going to do a standard for each. Periodically, you will need to do the for each using an array, and on rare occasions, you're going to need to go backwards. As you can see, the method you use is going to vary depending on exactly what you're wanting to accomplish. So it is nice to know the various ways that you can do this so that we can choose the correct one for the task that we need to achieve. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.